This is Nanoscape. I'm Seth Zimmerman.
And I'm Erin Spain.
On this show, we venture into the frontier of nanotechnology
with experts in the field who are turning the science of small into the next industrial revolution.
This podcast is brought to you by the International Institute for Nanotechnology at Northwestern University.
Today's guest, Dr. Shana Kelly, is pushing the boundaries of nanotechnology in healthcare, and in the process is transforming our understanding of human biology. She is the Nina B. Schwartz Professor of Chemistry and Biomedical Engineering at Northwestern University, as well as a Professor of Biochemistry and Molecular Genetics at the Feinberg School of Medicine, and the new president of the Chan Zuckerberg BioHub Chicago.
Shana is a leading figure in developing groundbreaking diagnostic tools and biomedical devices. Her work brilliantly intersects the realms of chemistry, biochemistry, of course, nanotechnology, and is driving innovations that revolutionize how we diagnose and treat diseases. Her research has led to the creation of novel biosensors that detect cellular and molecular biomarkers with unprecedented sensitivity and speed, significantly impacting both clinical research and patient care.
We welcome Shana to the show today to discuss how she's turning scientific discoveries into real-world applications and the evolving landscape of nanotechnology and its pivotal role in shaping the future of medicine.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
So, Shana, we'll go right into it. If you are at an event here in Chicago and someone asks you about your work as a scientist, what do you tell them? Because nanotechnology is hard to understand. People have a vision of what it might be, but how do you explain that to people who you just happen to meet?
So I have tried a number of different approaches over the years, and the key thing is to try to come up with a way to explain what one does that does not elicit a blank stare from the person who asked you the question. And what I'm going with these days is that I work on new technologies that use the foundations of chemistry and engineering and nanotechnology to allow us to have new ways to diagnose disease and new ways to treat disease. And I find that those are words that most people can put into context. It's not terribly specific, obviously, but most people seem satisfied with that as an answer.
You have been called one of the titans of nanotechnology by the National Science and Technology Medals Foundation. I'm very curious to know, how did nanotechnology become such a central part of your work?
Well, I actually didn't know about this, that I have been named a titan of nanotechnology. Is kind of ironic because I'm all of 5'1". So I'm a very small titan, but that's very nice that they did that. I just joined Northwestern about 3 years ago, but I have watched with a huge amount of interest what has happened at Northwestern with the IIN coming to be and really gaining this position of national prominence in nanotechnology, and have watched leaders like Chad Merkin really blaze a trail and became just increasingly interested in materials and how they can be used to develop really powerful new types of sensors and also to create new types of therapeutics. So being pulled into the field had a lot to do with what was happening at Northwestern and how exciting it was and all of the incredible demonstrations of what you could do with nanomaterials.
You could have moved your lab anywhere in 2021 and you chose Northwestern. Is that pretty much the reasoning behind the move?
Absolutely. It was a very easy decision. I think the chemistry department is absolutely one of the best, or maybe the best in the world. There's this incredible emphasis on nanotechnology in chemistry and across campus. So it was really a perfect fit with my interests and the kind of work I wanted to do.
And now you've become really part of the Chicago biomedical scene here. As the president of the Chan Zuckerberg BioHub in Chicago, you are playing this really big, important role in bringing a lot of the scientific community in Chicago together. Can you tell me a little bit about your role and how the BioHub is really helping to shape the future of the scientific community in Chicago?
Sure. So in 2022, a call went out from the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. This is a philanthropic organization funded by Mark Zuckerberg and his wife, Dr. Priscilla Chan. And that call was to ask universities across the United States to put proposals forward to fund what CZI referred to as a biohub. This would be a freestanding research institute where there was very strong collaboration with local universities. So at Northwestern, we thought this sounded like a really exciting opportunity, but the call specifically said that at least 3 universities had to come together in order to be eligible to apply. So Northwestern, the University of Chicago, University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign quickly converged and started working on a strategy to apply to this competition. We went in like, oh, we're never going to get this. I mean, look at all these other places that we're competing with. Ivy Leagues, the largest research universities in the U.S. But then we found ourselves as a semifinalist, a semi-semifinalist, and then as one of 3 proposals that was being considered. There were 57 other applications from every university you can think of in the United States, and we won.
Was there anything specific about the Chicago application that made it stand out?
We were told that we had this incredible bench strength. You know, our scientific community is not about 3 or 5 people or even 10. It's dozens and dozens of world-class scientists who are at the absolute forefront of their fields. And the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative was blown away by the science that's being done, by the collaborative spirit in our ecosystem. And since we launched in March of 2023, we now have the second biohub in the country. The first one was founded in San Francisco a number of years ago. We have a variety of different funding programs. We have our grantees meet at the biohub quarterly. And there's just these incredible sparks flying, you know, when people get together and all kinds of new, very creative ideas, collaborations. And so this has been such a incredible moment for our community and just represents this incredible partnership between the 3 universities. When we put the application together, we actually had the 3 VPs for research on the planning committee writing the proposal. At Northwestern, Milan Mrksic was very involved. At University of Illinois, it was Susan Martinez. At University of Chicago, Juan DePablo. And they were really instrumental in helping us chart the course and really maintaining that high level of collaboration. So we're just so fortunate that we have these incredible universities in our city that could come together to win this.
Let's talk a little bit more about the mission of the Chan Zuckerberg Biohub. It's to learn how to measure and modulate the immune system so we can eventually control inflammation, which is the driver of so many diseases. Tell me about this mission and what drives you to take on such big challenges in human health.
The biohubs by design take on very ambitious research agendas. That's why we're here. You know, you can be at a university and fund your research from the NIH or the NSF, and there's a certain conservativeness to that. But at the biohub, we're funded by CZI and we're funded very well to take on problems with approaches that are completely new, to develop technologies that right now just don't exist. And so really the only limitation right now is our own imagination, just in terms of the things that we can create. And inflammation was an area that we realized was just so ripe for this approach. We, in many cases, don't understand why inflammation starts, why immune cells become dysregulated, why it's so difficult to turn them around once they've become dysregulated. And so there's a lot of what I call like black box problems. We know what happens, but we don't know why. And so at the biohub, we're here to think about very interdisciplinary approaches that we can employ to work away at these problems. And if we're successful, we will have solutions that will be cross-cutting against so many different diseases, right? And eventually, we stop treating disease and we start preventing it.
And tell me what role nanotechnology is playing as you're pursuing inflammation and trying to develop these new technologies.
Nanotechnology plays a very large role in what we're doing. We're creating all kinds of new devices that allow us to measure biology in ways that are not yet possible. And so bringing nanomaterials into the mix where we can really match the size scale of molecules with our nanomaterials That gives us the sensitivity that we need to make these really precise measurements. And it allows us to think about going way, way down to the biological length scale. And I've always thought that was very powerful. That's an approach that we have employed in my lab. So you can look around and see the fingerprints of nanotechnology across all of the things that we're doing.
You've started 4 companies, have more than 50 patents, so it's safe to say you might have some expertise at navigating this innovation from research lab to the marketplace. So give us an update on those companies that you launched. Where are they today?
So of the 4, 2 of them were acquired by other companies, which is a great outcome. If you start a little startup company, raise some venture capital, get to a point where you have something that is seen as valuable by the big companies in this space, it's a wonderful way to keep the commercialization effort going using the resources of a large company. There's 2 that were both diagnostics companies that are in that category. And then we have 2 companies that are up and running right now. One is a sensing company. It's called Arma Biosciences, and it is developing devices that can be used in the home to make biomarker measurements. So just as, you go to the doctor, you go to the lab, they take your blood, your doctor gets the results, maybe not when you're actually in the doctor's office, but maybe they call you and then you get some read on what's going on with your biochemistry or your disease biomarkers. We want to skip the whole going to the lab step, allow people to test their biomarkers in their homes so that when they are doing a virtual visit with a healthcare provider, that person can say, okay, what does your biomarker reading look like? And there's just that real-time interchange of molecular level information and managing patients in the home. And that company has a strong nanoscience element to it. The molecular sensors that we develop that are the core technology, very much built around understanding nano-level properties of biomolecules and how we can manipulate them. And then we also have a therapeutic company, Control Therapeutics, but Control is CTRL, that is based on finding and harvesting immune cells from the blood that are able to recognize and destroy tumor cells. So these are immune cells that eventually made their way into a tumor, learned how to recognize tumor cells, and then came back out into the bloodstream. And using an approach where we take a blood sample, we label those tumor-reactive immune cells with nanoparticles that are magnetic, and then we use those nanoparticles to pull the cells out of the blood, we're able to harvest enough cells that we can then go into the lab, expand the cells, so we can take them to levels where they're going to be able to be infused into a patient, go find the tumor, and try to destroy it. So that's a startup where we're doing incredibly well. We have one of the largest venture capital groups in the U.S. backing us and really helping us succeed. And that company is incubating right in Fulton Market here. So really benefiting from the Chicago ecosystem. So those are 2 that are live and doing incredibly well. And then there's a few more in the pipeline.
How are you balancing all this? Because that's not a little bit of stuff happening. You have a lot. It's not a nano amount.
I mean, my life has been a juggling act for quite a while. I have a wonderful family, an amazing husband who's also a researcher at Northwestern who runs an incredible group of people also doing nanoscience. I have 2 wonderful boys who have kept things nice and busy over the years. And then, there's the group at Northwestern, there's the BioHub, there's the startups, but I just wouldn't have it any other way. All of these are channels to make an impact and have science really come to fruition through technologies and products that I hope will eventually touch patients.
I mean, the biosensor company, this couldn't be more timely with how many virtual care visits are happening now. Was this something that you incubated during the COVID-19 epidemic?
Yes. So Arma was a pandemic baby. It might not have come to be if there hadn't been a pandemic and a spotlight on virtual healthcare. We had not been able to do virtual consults before the pandemic. There were just all these regulatory barriers and all kinds of stuff. And then out of necessity, we said, doctors can talk to their patients on computers. And the world has never been the same. I love this. I mean, not having to go to the doctor's office is just like the best thing, right? But it's still limited. And, you do start to see new solutions. Like there are like these kiosks you can go into and use different little devices to get some reads on what's happening with your body. But the ultimate is the home, especially for people with chronic diseases that if they're not managed day to day, they bounce in and out of the hospital. But it doesn't have to be that way. If you could measure your important biomarkers every day, check in with your physician when they're trending in the wrong direction, there's so many things that physicians can do for patients to stabilize them and improve their quality of life, but they need the information.
You mentioned a hurdle was regulations. That before COVID, physicians had a hard time interacting with patients virtually. When bringing new products to the marketplace, especially nanotechnology product, what sort of hurdles can people expect? And how are you able to prepare for that and overcome them?
There are many, many hurdles that have to be addressed when you're going from great research results in an academic setting through the product development process. It's a different mindset. It is a different way of doing science, and it has to be perfect, basically. In research in an academic setting, it's like, this seems to work pretty well. The error bars are like this big, but we got to see something in the data. And as long as you can get reviewers to go along with you, you publish papers, you do your patents, and that's how it goes. But in product development, the product has to work perfectly every single time, especially in the medical arena. So there is a huge amount of rigor that has to be brought to the science to get going in a startup. All medical products have to go through the FDA, right? And there are very specific things that they want to see. You don't make up product development as you go along. That is a very tried and true process that has to be done the same way for every single product. So it's a very challenging thing for people in academia that are used to doing things a certain way. If you're starting a company, you can pull in a few people that have done it before. In the industrial setting, you will save yourself a lot of headaches. And so that's what I've learned over the years.
So you already mentioned your husband and your scientific collaborator in many cases, Ted Sargent. More than a decade ago, the two of you offered a course called Introduction to Nanotechnology, the New Science of Small. Now, nanotechnology is still considered a fairly new science, but so much has changed in the past decade. Tell me how the landscape of nanotechnology has evolved since you offered that course, and where do you see significant growth or change occurring in the near future?
So when Ted and I did that course, I think it was really early days for the field. I sometimes get emails from people that say, oh, I just watched the videos in your course and I was just blown away. And I kind of cringe because I'm like, oh, it's so out of date. Don't watch that. I think they're putting CDs into like a CD reader or something. I'm like, oh, my goodness. So the field has come so far, and scientific fields go through this very interesting maturation process. In the beginning, a lot of it is about hype. You put a certain word in the title of your paper, and it's going to get elevated just because of that hype. But that eventually settles down, right? And then the science has to be very real, very rigorous, having true impact. And I think nanotechnology is really there. Think about the vaccines that were produced in the pandemic. Those are packaged in nanoparticles. And that work was going on for decades. And it was at the point where they could just take it off the shelf and make it work. And we all, well, not all, but a lot of us got vaccinated. Yeah. And thank goodness that the field was mature enough for that. And there are so many other examples of new immunotherapy, some that have been developed at Northwestern that are nanoparticle based. We've learned a lot about how best to work with nanomaterials, what things work well in the human body, what things work less well. So we're now getting to the impact part of the field maturing. And that, to me, is the most exciting part. It's not the hype, it's the actual impact.
If you were going to make a sequel to that class, what would you call it? The same name?
It would be about the point that I just made about the impact of nanotechnology. What are technologies that we have now that we didn't have a decade ago because of nanoscience? What things are in the clinic or making their way to the clinic? because of that scientific foundation. And that's a lot more than a course worth of stuff, right? It's just an immense, immense field now.
There is hope that nanotechnology will be leveraged to address health and, of course, environmental inequalities and improve global health. So are there any particular initiatives or strategies that you find most promising in these efforts?
I think we all have the mindset now that we should not necessarily be developing things that would only work in the developed world. And when you go out and try to raise money, investors are very mindful of this. We don't need any more million-dollar cures for disease or million-dollar treatments. Our own healthcare system can't even afford that. Affordability is key. Access is key. And so I think as we're developing new approaches that have biomedical applications, we just absolutely have to have that in mind. Certainly, there are organizations like the Gates Foundation that have made such significant inroads in the developing world and have done such tremendous things there. And I think the massive scale of the investment and the philanthropy there has really put it on people's radar that you have to have things that can translate into that environment. In particular, I think the engineering community is really caught up in that side of things in a wonderful way. And people, colleagues of mine, are taking systems that they develop and going out to Africa and trying things out in the field and seeing how things go. And that is not easy work at all. So I think it's really becoming very mainstream and really ingrained in the way that scientists now work.
So we've talked a lot about health and medicine and nanotechnology, but I know that you follow the field closely, and we're wondering what fascinates you or inspires you about nanotechnology outside of health and medical applications.
Well, the fact that I am married to someone who is very passionate about all things energy related and who has made incredible progress in the application of nanomaterials to a variety of problems in clean and renewable energy. That's one that's on my radar on a daily basis because we talk about it at dinner time, and I certainly follow all of Ted's great work. So that's an area that I don't know that much about scientifically, but I have a great appreciation for, because I do think the two biggest issues for us as a society, it is, improving our health overall, preventing the great, great burden of disease on our society and on our individual lives, and then finding a way to keep this planet in reasonable shape such that we can continue to live here. So to me, those are such important areas.
As we look ahead, how might emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence, which is everywhere and impacting every industry, impact the business side of nanotechnology and nanomedicine?
I personally believe that artificial intelligence will just touch every aspect of what we do. It's very early days. It's really quite nascent. If you're using commercial platforms for AI, you can really see where they're okay and where they're terrible.
Yeah.
But the starting place is there. I can just see really every aspect of what we do as scientists being augmented by artificial intelligence. A lot of the different things that we do as individuals being affected by artificial intelligence. I mean, to me, it's really the same level of shift as before personal computers and after. When, we used to clunk away on our typewriters or whatever, and, everything was just so slow and manual. And then all of a sudden, we had these extra brains to take advantage of. And boy, didn't that change our society in a very fundamental way. And artificial intelligence is the next step. There's a lot of manual basic things that humans will not need to do anymore. And then we can also leverage the great power of artificial intelligence to think about science in a way that is really difficult for a single individual to do, right? I mean, the scientific literature is so vast at this point that it's impossible for one person, even in a given field, to have read and digested every single paper that they should know about. But a good large language model can do that. At the Chan Zuckerberg Biohub in Chicago, we're thinking a lot about that. Obviously, our funding comes from an organization with very strong ties to the progress that has been made in artificial intelligence. Mark Zuckerberg is the co-CEO of CZI and very much infuses his perspective on AI into all of the activities, including what happens at the BioHub. And so I'm personally really excited about it. I think it allows us to do science in just a much bigger way and not repeating things, but instead every experiment is a new experiment. Every experiment can be contextualized in the background of everything that's ever been done. And I think we'll just make huge leaps forward so much faster this way.
I am very impressed that you were able to work with your husband so well, because I know my wife and I are in the same field and we would not be able to work well together. I mean, it sounds like you guys talk shop at dinner, which is amazing. How have you guys been able to work so well together?
Well, Ted and I came together originally as two people that absolutely loved science. It was just the spark that we could see in each other that was so shared. We have many other common interests, but we just both believe so strongly in the power of science, in the value in doing research, and husband and wives, we spend how many ever years together. It can have its moments, but that's just always something that we can come back to as this unifying force. And our two boys, they also love science. Like they've listened to enough of the chatter around the dinner table that they kind of want to be involved. And so our older one is going to be a senior in high school this year. He's taken a ton of chemistry classes and different sciences, and he's really excited about it. And it's so wonderful. I mean, I've worked with young scientists for decades, and it is so wonderful anytime you see somebody really perk up and get excited about science. But when it's your own son, it's like, holy cow, wow, this is awesome.
I did it. I succeeded. I nailed it. Yeah.
Yeah. And for me, as a mom, one way or the other, it's absolutely fine. But it's a thrill to see him really engage with what is so exciting about science.
I got one fun one. Is there a common myth about nanotechnology that you would like to debunk right now? This is your platform to just be like, no, nanobots are not a thing, or anything along those lines of some sort of myth.
Nanomaterials are this wonderful toolbox and playground for scientific research and the development of new technologies. But for the most part, they're not alive. They're just these things that we manipulate. So the science fiction part of it, I've never liked that much. And people get very carried away with it in some of the same ways that people get carried away about artificial intelligence. And I mean, there is reason for concern there, but there's also people that get quite carried away. I'm glad the science in the field has really matured to a point where we can say, no, it's not like nanobots that are going to take over the world. It's this way that we can package new vaccines, or the way we can develop a new drug for cancer, or a new way to detect disease. And now it's much more fact-based.
As we wrap up today, what would you like to leave listeners with about the role of nanotechnology in our daily lives and what we can expect? What would you like to leave listeners with?
I think mainly just an appreciation that this is a really critically important and very central field in science. It represents the interface between chemistry and biology and medicine and engineering. And there's been so much promise demonstrated about what we can do with nanotechnology. And I really think that we're just getting started. And maybe the other piece is that this is a field where many aspects of it were born at Northwestern. And the leadership of the field has come from people like Chad Merkin at Northwestern and some of my other colleagues. And we are just so well positioned to keep leading and innovating and showing the impact that can come from this amazing field.
That was a fantastic note to leave us with today, Dr. Shana Kelly. Thank you so much for coming on the show. This was fascinating conversation, and I love your enthusiasm for the science, and we hope to have you back on the show again sometime.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for listening. This podcast is brought to you by the International Institute for Nanotechnology at Northwestern University. Be sure to follow this show on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts, and be sure to give us a 5-star review.
For more information about IIN, go to our website, iinano.org/podcast.